My name's Simon Laube. I'm Chief Executive at the Early Childhood Council, and it is a real privilege to be invited here to speak to you today. And I'd just like to thank the Infocare team and acknowledge the work that Chang has just outlined to us. That's the first time I've ever met him, and already you can see there's someone there from another industry who's come onto the scene in ECE in New Zealand with lots of innovative ideas with a plan to save us time and reduce some of the burden and stress that we face every day. So, I welcome people like that because we can use all the help we can get. That said, new technologies require people to use them and then to give feedback because you can never start with perfect. You've got to start somewhere, as you do in your centres with your systems, and things get built up over time. So I certainly wish them all the best with what they're trying to do because it definitely aligns with what we know about early childhood. That basically you guys need all the help you can get, So today I'm talking broadly around the subject around getting audit ready, kind of relevant in this kind of funding space. But before I get into it and do a bit more kind of background, can I just get you to raise your hands if you are from out of Canterbury? Is there anyone from out of Canterbury? Okay, there's a few people. Okay. And could you please put up your hand if you are a centre manager? Okay. What about if you're an administrator? Yep. Okay. And now, different question. Raise your hand if you're a registered teacher. Okay. That's good. And last question. Please raise your hand if you're a director or owner of a business or a board member of a community group. So, okay. Right. That's good. So there's a huge cross section in the room, okay? And there were slightly more administrators than anyone else, but quite a lot of centre managers too, which you'd expect. Um, and I think it's very interesting to see that is the natural fabric of our people, our early childhood people, these kind of blended roles. And no surprise, the number of registered teachers who I didn't even ask you if you're actually teaching, but obviously you are because you're the last line of defence when the relievers fail you. Okay, so just a bit about me. So I've got a bit of credibility in this education funding space. So I've had in 2010 I started my first role in the Ministry of Education was in early childhood funding. And when I started in that team, the first thing that kind of arrived on my desk was that the ministry had accidentally done the rate change for early childhood services twice. So the person in the data team had applied the percentage change to the rates, and then it had come back to the policy team, and the policy team hadn't realised they'd done it. So then the policy team added another percentage on the rates, and we were in trouble. The team was in trouble because we'd spent $20 million that year that hadn't been budgeted for. Did they take those percentages away? No, it was just too embarrassing. So, but it was a very bad kind of, culture to be moving into. And it is very much kind of like what the ministries are like with all these silos of people who don't really talk to each other. The other thing was the participation program was being rolled out around about then. So those were the days of Anne Tolley and the removal of the 100% funding bans. The participation program was interesting because the ministry had budgeted the majority of the money that had been budgeted in the program was actually what would happen if the children had come into your centres and started to participate. That was the majority of the $90 million. But again, in the ministry, they actually budget for the children separately. There's another team that budgets for the children, and they'd already budgeted for the children. So once again, you've got a ministry where you've got what looks like a really great initiative of $90 million. 60 million of that is for participation that they've already paid for somewhere else. So that $60 million doesn't actually go anywhere because it's already paid for. So it's just wrong, you know. So again, it's not easy in the ministry. I suppose I'd like you to know, like, then you can see how we kind of end up talking past them a bit. I'm going to talk a bit of, they're going to come up quite a bit in today's chat. The other thing I'd just like to mention is I've also developed funding models for charter schools, which is quite an interesting and another controversial area. So there's been a couple of different funding models developed there. And I tell you what, you think early childhood funding is complicated. School funding is actually more complicated. Nobody understands school funding. Nobody. There are papers on the calculations for how the staffing stuff works. You definitely need a maths degree, possibly a maths PhD to understand the model. I'm not joking. So that's actually way harder for any ministry official to get their head around because the general level of financial capability in the ministry is very, very low. They don't have a lot of. You'd think it was really high, you would, but it's not. It's. I'm not being mean about them. It's just so you know, you know. Um, So yeah, my qualifications are in law, political studies, and recently I did a master's in public administration. So around how you kind of change big things in the public service. And just a little bit about ECC. I know most of you kind of know who ECC is, but also maybe you don't. It's the largest association in the ECE sector, but it's only for education and care service types. So other service types have other associations, and we're the Association for Education and Care Services. We're an incorporated society. We're based in Wellington. We have an elected governing board that's comprised of our members, and we're really, really small. We only have a CEO, me. I've got a policy person, I've got an events person, and I've got a membership person, and that is it. That's all we are. But we're pretty. We do a lot with a little. And I'd just like to say, I'd like to recognise two of our Christchurch board members, Diana Jenkinson, who some of you might know from Fundamentals, and Danielle Fisher from Stables Montessori. So that's great coming down to Christchurch and seeing the networks that they've established in Christchurch, because Christchurch is, from my point of view in Wellington, it is the most connected part of the whole of the country when it comes to early childhood. You guys regularly fill out rooms like this. You are definitely punching above your weight in almost every regard. So whatever it is you're doing down here, keep it up. But you're a real model to the rest of the country because they don't have what you have. Since January, ECC, our focus has been obviously around the criteria changes, and it's been full on. What looked like very small changes, and they are very small changes, coming in very, very quickly on the 20th of April. And really, there were a few things that everyone just needed to get right ahead of the 20th of April. And so we really focused on making sure our members could get on top of that. I think it's again to link back to what Infocare was saying. This is our kind of our stress side of things. We all just want the compliance stuff to be tidy, and we don't want to be stressing about it. So it just needs to be right. Interesting with the criteria changes, I think that the changes themselves haven't been too difficult. They're actually relatively easy to work your way through. But what people have just inevitably done is they start to pull a thread to replace something with the little thing that they've changed, and you just can't resist it, can you? You look at the whole thing, and you're like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And before you know it, you're reviewing a whole cascade of other policies too. Good on you. That is actually what good governance and good management does. You don't just go in and do what the ministry tells you to do. They haven't got a grand plan for you. They don't know what it's really like for you, but you do. If you see something wrong, you've got the autonomy. You can fix it. I think that autonomy is really good. One thing I will say though is one thing you couldn't do is you couldn't upload policies into an AI platform and ask it to spit out something because you would be in a situation where you would have no confidence in the AI's ability to be able to discern between something that is actually a mandatory thing that you just have to have in the policy, even if we don't see the benefit, but it has to be there because it says it has to be there. And whilst the AI probably could restructure things quite nicely, like it's almost like a blender, isn't it? So you can trust AI to blend things up nicely. But when the ministry says, where's this? It's got to be there. So be careful with AI. And if you're interested in the policy side of things, we're doing a workshop on Friday here in Christchurch, and there's still slots available if you're interested in that. So next week is budget day. It's a really big deal. It is the top big deal on my calendar every year because there's always surprises in the budget. And I suppose the couple of little tidbits I can give you today would be I'm expecting a cost adjustment. I'm expecting one at least 1.6%. Call me crazy. Don't give me that look. I hope we get a cost adjustment. We really need a cost adjustment. Honestly, your finances are not going very good. So I know you've got in Christchurch, you have pretty good occupancy. Actually, enrollments are looking pretty strong down here, but costs are going up faster. That's the problem. So a cost adjustment is actually really important. So I'm hoping for a cost adjustment. And the other thing I can tell you is I haven't been invited to the education sector budget briefing, which you might, am I shunned? Quite possibly. I'm always getting into trouble. But no, I think it's good news. It means that we're not on the chopping block, because next week, the budget, it is a dark budget. And, if you've seen on Facebook people dressing up Nicola Willis in black capes with sickles and things, it's not really a laughing matter. Like, that's actually quite a good metaphorical thing for next week. Certainly in Wellington, that is the mood in Wellington. It's very grim. There are a lot of people worried about their jobs, and they should be, because on Thursday, lots of them will find out that they're going to lose their jobs. That's pretty hard, right? And it is quite good to step back and go, what about, our difficulties? We do have difficulties, but they're different difficulties. We're actually, relative to some of these other industries, including public sector, tourism, and like infrastructure, we're actually doing pretty well in a bad time. So so I will be poring over this document soon. I'm not looking forward to that. Okay, cost adjustments. We've had some pretty low cost adjustments. The last one, 0.5%, tracks back pretty low, actually. There's no real rhyme or reason between the different shades of political parties, between the, National or Labour. Both of them are, which you'd expect, because both are actually committed to education. Although if you had to choose between the two, Labour probably would invest more than National. You would, based on the historical data. This is the actual money, though. So the last slide had the percentage changes. I know it's going to be hard to read. What I've got on here, just a couple of points to make out. Every year they budget an amount. So let's look at budget 2025, that top line. So their variance, so they budgeted a certain amount, and then, no, let's see, comparing budget 2024. So in 2024, they thought they were going to spend 2.7 billion on ECE, but then in 2024, once they'd spent the money, they actually had spent 2.9 billion. So this is in their budgeting. So those guys who are supposed to forecast how many children you're getting in and how much funding they're going to dish out, they're not quite doing their job right, because those numbers need to line up. They can't. But how far out of whack are they? It's actually a lot out. So these are in millions. So that's $160 million over budget. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. So if you're someone like Nicola Willis sitting in the beehive, you will be stressing about ECE. And actually, we can already tell them that same thing's going to happen this year because of what they did with pay parity last year and what everyone had to do to move into the top bands. All right. So they're going to have another one this year where they basically going to have to pay for things that they didn't think they're going to have to. I'll be interested to see if it's in the same territory of 100 million or so, because I wouldn't be surprised if it was. So ask you to think about that. Also have a look at this slide. So this is the number of enrolments by service type, and it is important because it's very static. The majority of the enrolments are in education and care services. And this isn't about competition. I'm not putting it up there for that. But what happens in those services dictates what it costs for government, because you got those centres they have so much of the market. They're holding on to it as well, despite everything. Even though the number of services is going down, enrolments in education and care services are going up, not down. This one shows the fluctuations by how much they're changing year on year, percentage based. And you can see some, like Homebase got smashed. You know, they lost 18% of total enrolments in 1 year, but they're bouncing back a bit, but they have to bounce back a lot to get back to where they were. So that's quite hard to do. Meanwhile, I think the only other thing of interest here is the dark blue line, education and care, which you can't really see, but the variance is really below 5%. So it's quite steady. It's not fluctuating very much. And that's the percentage of enrolments for ed and care. So this is the trajectory over since 2018. That goes back, you can go back 10 more years, another 20 years, the same trajectory is happening all the way back. But you can see it's kind of tapering off a little bit there. But I think it will keep going up, actually. I think it tapered and it will probably start to lift. So that is important to know, because your funding claims, when you put in a funding claim, that is the key piece of information that goes back to the government that they then pay you the money on. That's called demand driven, because they don't know, they're supposed to estimate how much your claims are going to be so that they've got enough money to pay us all. But they don't do that very well. So let's hope luckily they've got unlimited money, so they'll just pay it from some magic bucket. But yeah, we've never had a situation where they've refused to pay, have they? They've always paid. And that is because the law says they have to. So this is the obscure reference at the start of the funding handbook to section 548. It's actually quite hard to get to that section in that piece of legislation. It takes a lot of scrolling. And it's just those words there, that they must be paid general grants. So that's important too, this kind of concept of a general grant. I'll come back to that in a minute. So then with these general grants, they can either be paid without conditions, good luck to you there, or they can have conditions. And the other point is that they can be used for any purpose the service provider thinks fit, which is also quite an important concept, because it means that you're getting a general grant. They're not actually paying for your costs. That's not what the payment from the ministry is intended to be. It is just a general grant. And then with that grant, you can use it as you see fit. So you need to manage your own finances. So coming back to the conditions, and I've kind of given this away, but does anyone know where the conditions are written down? It's obviously in this beautiful document that we all love, the funding handbook. And actually, I don't think you can get a PDF of this document. You have to download the different chapters now, but I don't know if it's a handbook or, it kind of makes it sound quite small. It's a tome, isn't it? And I'll move through this a bit quicker. Okay, so some of the conditions, now this is important too. So Section 5 has been changed in recent years by the Labour government to bring in this concept that the conditions can include conditions around your employment matters. So they had to put that into law. Well, why do you think they had to do that? For pay parity. They needed it to be able to do pay parity. Um, so that's why, you know, 3B2 has all that stuff on pay parity. So those are the conditions. So once you kind of understand that you've got this general grant, but it's subject to these conditions, then you can understand that the worst sanction you can have with pay parity is you've breached the conditions of a general grant. So then the worst thing that they could do is take the money back because you didn't follow the conditions that they said for the money that they're going to pay you. So that's where they recover. Do they take all the money back? No, because, you know, that's not how it works. They'll recalculate your funding on the next various rates that you do qualify for, you know, so they start to scale you back. So this is why fee schedules are extremely important, and they always have been. But when things are really, really tight, they're even more important because the model was always a general grant. They never paid all your costs. I know that there are many, many services that are able to operate just from the general grants alone. I've seen them myself. There are lots of them. I don't see any new ones that are setting up. They're a very endangered breed, but the fee schedule is critical because that's going to bring in the private revenue you need to be able to meet these costs because the general grants are not keeping up with those costs. So you've got to be, your finger needs to be on the pulse of the fee schedule and not scaring parents. I'm not saying everyone needs to bring in fees. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying eyeball your fees and be very conscious around parents' willingness to pay. The bit that you need to focus on with fees is the parents who can afford to pay more, because that is an opportunity that you can't afford to miss, I'm afraid. Because if they can afford to pay more and they will actually want to pay more, you know, make it easy for them to pay more because that's the sustainability of your service. It's not going to magically appear through the general grants.
So just add in the family boost. Where does that fit in
Yeah.
with the kind of the fee schedule? Has that changed things?
Yeah, Family Boost is a good one because it's caused us, obviously, we've all got like quarterly statements, and parents are more and more harassing us around, can I have these invoices? If Family Boost was to be removed in the future, it would immediately cause a 40% increase in fees to almost all the families who can pay fees. So it's become a critical policy in a way, even though it's not how we would have done it. But the families can actually get quite a lot of money back,
So
and they
does
are
the
claiming it.
government has put up fees
Yeah.
to offset the claim family boost, so you've seen some just off the
Of course they do. Yeah, of course they do. Because from a provider point of view, when you see the government bring in something like Family Boost, you know that families can actually afford to pay a little bit more. You wouldn't be cynical and increase your fees by 40% because you like trust is the number one thing. If you acted like that, you know, parents would hate you, obviously, you know. And so there are good reasons why you don't behave like that. But you're right, it's in the mix. It's no secret. Um, Pay parity. I won't stay on this one too long, but in July last year, there were 817 centres in extended pay parity, and by November, that number had gone down to 673. So 144 centres used that EC20A process to opt into full parity before the moratorium kicked in. That's a massive change. None of that would have been budgeted by the ministry. If you go back to those budget slides, that's, you know, that's 144 services the ministry wouldn't have been expecting to go onto the top funding rates. So, yikes. Even, you know, pay parity changed quite substantially. People seeing a window closing, they just dived into the best one they could. make it. I'll move along because I've used up a lot of time. How am I going to time? Okay. So important areas for audits. So the ministry needs information from you so it can calculate these general grants. And the main things that they're collecting from you are the funded child hours. And it's really important from the ministry's point of view. When you saw those dollars, right, the $2.9 billion needs to be for real children and it needs to be for hours when they really attended, of course, including some absences as well. That's really critical. That's the underlying building block of that justifies the 2.9 billion. That's all there is. They can't be paying for children that don't exist. They can't be paying for hours that were never delivered. They just can't. So that's the job of the audit team when you see them. That's what they're coming to check for. So what do we know about the audit team? So look, the simple purpose of an audit is they're just verifying that what you're claiming and receiving is correct. So again, that might sound simple, but where are the conditions written down? In the funding handbook. How long is the funding handbook? It's massive. Is it 200 pages, 300 pages? Those are the conditions. So that's the auditor's Bible. That's what they'll be using as they go through your information. So I talk to the audit team quite a lot. Quite like the audit team as far as the ministry teams go. Like they're actually a group of really nice accountants, but they are accountants, and we all know what accountants are like. Like they're a special type of person, and they're good. They're good at their job. You need accountants. Everyone needs a good accountant. Not always good on the human side of things, but very good with numbers. Very, very good with numbers. There are only 12 of them in the country, and they're dotted around in the regional offices. And they audit between 12 and 17% of all the services each year. But they're also auditing the schools as well. So there's some busy people. They're allowed to use warrants if you don't give them access to information that when they request it, they can use a warrant and enforce it. It's good to know. I don't think they ever do it. And I've had a lot of people complaining about auditors, though, not just the ministry auditors, even their own auditors. So that when you get a complaint about behaviour, because you guys are actually really good at dealing with behaviour type issues with your own people, but when they're not one of your people, how do you go about dealing with a behaviour issue? So they do have professional standards. So there is actually a professional body that you can go to. Of course, you could raise it as a kind of client issue with the ministry. If it's a ministry auditor, you could say, hey, this person's behaviour maybe goes against the ministry code of conduct. Almost certainly it would if you're concerned, So you could raise it as a behaviour concern in the ministry. Or there's the professional body. And they all need to maintain their professional, qualifications to be able to audit. And their process, they say, starts with a phone call. So they like to be personable. They send you, I think it's a bit like Aero. Once the auditors have deployed, so you've got the phone call, you're into the audit. You started with the soft part of the audit. But from an auditor's point of view, remember they're looking for evidence and information. They don't want you to start changing that information once the audit has started. They really don't. That will be very precious and sacred ground for them if they start to feel like that's what you're doing. However, what I can tell you is that's your information. Back to the kind of policy space. If you see something's not quite right in your service, someone picks up, through a data check, and you want to fix something, you're legally allowed to fix it. No one can stop you from fixing something. But there is a little bit of a grey area, isn't there, between fixing something and kind of retrospectively changing something because of an audit. So long as you can keep those two things separated, you should be okay when you're fixing things. Because let's face it, audit comes in and even you are auditing yourself, actually, you know. So you're gonna pick up stuff. You're gonna pick it up. So don't worry about that. That is human, and you're legally allowed to do that. Okay, talking about records. So in the funding handbook, the records can be kept in a form to suit your service as long as they meet their requirements. Then there's a whole lot of what looks like kind of contradictory stuff around paper-based and, when can you get signatures? And you heard Ian before saying around can you use digital sign-ins and things. And actually the funding handbook says you can, but Ian's right. I talked to the audit team as well. I'm like, oh, none of my members, none of them can use digital, sign-ins. And they're like, oh, but you can. I'm like, oh, really? Does anyone do it? And they're like, oh, no, no. I was like, has anyone ever asked? He's like, yes, yes, yes. It's like, well, if you can do it, but no one has done it, can you really do it? Not yet, but it will change. Like we can see, with AI coming in, you can just see the trajectory of change. The ministry is going to have to catch up when it comes to digital records, and they're going to get left behind. The change will happen very soon too, because how much longer can they get away with where it is now? Not much longer. So further conditions. So these are when the records are stored, no matter if it's paper-based or electronic. Then there are two key conditions. So one is integrity and one is usability. So integrity I've kind of talked about, and that's partly why they want those hard copy things. That's why they want the signatures, because of the integrity benefits. Theoretically, you could design a digital system that was actually better integrity than hard copy, because of course everyone's known how to make a false hard copy thing before. Like you can do it, right? It's not perfect, but you can actually do digital things that are better than hard copy as well. It's definitely possible, but can you get the design right of the platform? Because everything would need to be date stamped. All of the IDs and things need to be controlled a certain way. And then, yes, it could be signed off. And usability. So there have been, there's lots of cases where, unfortunately, the auditors come in and actually, the administrator has literally gotten rid of all of the staff records. I'm not kidding. They're all gone. They didn't exist. So potentially there's nothing, there's just nothing. And those guys, they survive. The ministry doesn't obliterate them straight away, but you're asking to be obliterated if you do that. You really are. It's just too dangerous. So with the electronic attendance records criteria, there are a few things around security. So things like authorized users can only be linked to one electronic signature. So you can't have father and mother using the same signature. And if you do, immediately your whole system is non-compliant. If that can happen, the whole system is non-compliant. You've got to have system controls around usernames and passwords, and the system has to record who created them. Because, obviously, what if the centre created the account of the father and then they set the password, then suddenly you've just created a fake person. That doesn't meet any integrity standard. That isn't even the father. That is actually the centre with a account that looks like the father, but it's not the father because the father didn't set it up, doesn't know the password, and didn't actually use it, right? So that's danger category. And there needs to be controls around breaches. So that would be like people having my password is 1234, and then the auditors. So actually, when you see an auditor in the centre and you see them sniffing around the kind of electronic kind of sign-in sheets, they'll be looking to see how the controls are and just generally how people are behaving. If people kind of start shouting out passwords or acting like it's all a joke, They will, they absolutely, that's what they're supposed to look out for. And then that's, back at the ministry, that's an integrity issue. So that system is completely doesn't have the integrity, and that's their job. That's what they're looking for. They're specifically supposed to come and have a look at that, with your digital systems. Okay, so moving on. So when you get that audit coming in, this is the list of kind of documentation that they ask you for. And what I was thinking is, and I think we'll do something for members on this, just a checklist around. It's almost like someone's going to ask you for this in the future, so you want it to be in a kind of place where you can quite easily gather it all together and give it to them. Because what I wouldn't like to be in a situation where I got this list. It's a big list, actually, isn't it? But like RS7 returns easy, right? But when it comes to some of the staffing things, I would want, personally, this is my own personal opinion, I would want those employee files to contain all of the things on this list, every single employee file to contain every single thing on this list. And then I would just ideally give access to that employee file to the auditor, because I would know that in the file everything's in there. What I wouldn't want to have to do is to suddenly go, oh, I'm not sure if every single one of those things is in everything, and then I have to go through every single one of them and check it myself. I'd rather know in advance this is what they're looking for, put it on the file, then just give access to the file. That's my own personal preference. I've talked to some members, though, who are vehement about this stuff, and they're like, I am not giving the auditors access to anything they haven't requested at all. They won't be looking at my employee files. And it's like, okay, I can understand that, because it's legal. They can say that. You can say that. That's legally a fair position to have. Um, but then that creates a bit more work. Like, how do you just get the bits that they've asked for? And if you're willing to do that work, fine.
Simon,
Yeah.
I had an audit 4 weeks ago. They also asked for the hourly rate for staff members, and they wanted to view all the pay parity information for each staff member.
Yes. So look, if we go to the next slide, so if we go through that list again and connect it back to why the documents are requested. So you're talking about pay parity. So they're almost being lazy. Are they being lazy, or when you gave them whatever access you gave them at the start, maybe it didn't give them everything they needed, and so then they're making a further request, which is effectively getting you to do the donkey work of giving them everything in one place. But if you were to give them employment agreements, that should have hourly rates in it. So if you were one of those people who was not very good with the auditors and you're like, back off, guys, you would know, those guys would say, work it out yourself. I've given you the employment agreements, all the hourly rates are there, you figure it out. Because I've complied with the request. They can't, with their powers, they can't make you do work for them. They're the auditors. All you have to do is facilitate their access to the information. You don't have to do the computational work. That's their job. But you can do it. You want to have a good relation. Yeah, you've done it.
But no, they sent me an email, and they asked in the email they wanted staff hourly rates and pay parity documentation.
Yeah, so I think too, they wanted to also have a look at the system to show how we were tracking in where the 2,080 hours, what was the record keeping system.
Yeah.
It was just easy to know before they came. So, like you say, I just gave them all the information.
Yeah. Look, I actually think that's quite reasonable then, because obviously part of the conditions is the salary progression, and obviously we do have to track the 2,080 hours, but it's not clearly on their list at the moment. And different people have done different things. There are SMS platforms that do the pay parity stuff as well.
Those things were there.
No.
So it was created a system that worked, and then you're in this grey area of not wanting to make the paperwork look different at the start to the middle to the window coming, because there's now a new cover sheet for that and a new.
Yeah. Honestly, don't worry, don't stress too much around pay parity. Like, you guys have done a great job of pay parity, you really have, and nobody's done it perfectly. Every single centre has a couple of assessments that don't know how you did it, but you generally erred on the side of generosity, which is actually creating another problem. If those teachers leave ECE and go to the compulsory sector, they will lose. You cannot give people, you can't make an assessment that is not stacked up by the evidence you received. And I can guarantee it, education payroll will verify everything. And if there's a gap, they're not going to be recognised. That is the government's approach. Either you prove it or it's not recognised. Whereas in the ECE sector, you guys have been like, oh, well, oh, yeah, I trust you. Oh, yes, I can see you work there. You know, yeah, we'll recognise that. Doesn't work like that in government. No. So just looking at the list again, so you've got, I suppose, the top one there, RS7, actually really important. That's the attestation. So they've created a legal way of capturing you. How am I going to start? Not very good. I'm gonna keep going. These slides will be available after the session. I just want to look at the ones that. So these ones from the list have issues around digital issues. So attendance registers. The audit team really want to see that weekly sheet signed by the parents to confirm that the drop-off and pick-up times actually were accurate. That's kind of like their bare minimum. So they need that. They need that kind of signed. And they want that. That's what they want you to give them. So I reckon you should just have that if you can, because It's really that's like their bottom line. They really do want that, and it's anti-fraud. They don't trust the digital systems. They want something that has integrity. They want to know that the parents have approved it, and that's the evidence they'll accept. It doesn't mean that SMS things aren't helpful. I would personally rely on SMS more, but it's more a case of how do you protect yourself from audit. It's not about how do I run an efficient, smart business. The SMS guys are running efficient, smart businesses for you, which you need more than you need the ministry. But the ministry at this stage in their development, the audit team, they need a little bit of compliance burden here. So the other one is enrollment records. So there's two parts in the enrollment records that make it really sensitive. So one is the 20 hours. So when the parents put the allocation of the hours down, that binds the parents into a legal arrangement with the ministry. It is possible for the ministry to prosecute parent based on that form. It's critical the parents complete that and sign it because they're legally liable. No one's ever been called for anything, but the ministry have to take it deadly seriously because that is the only piece of accountability in 20 hours that exists. That's how they justify that policy to get the money in the first place. So great that they got the money, but the money comes with accountability and protections, and the protection is that enrollment form. So make sure you have an enrollment fee that is signed, and make sure if you change the 20 hours, they sign the change, and they get them to sign it back again if it's only a one-off change. Sorry, but it's a lot of signing, but it's good to know there's no way around it. You have to do it that way. The other one is funding bands. So that's the staff record. Again, that's because there's a lot of money attached to moving between, say, the 100% band and the 80 to 99% band. So the ability to put a staff member on that record that didn't exist is a huge fraud risk from the ministry's point of view. So that's why the staff list has to be signed at the end of the week, and it has by all of the people that you've submitted in ratio we're working. So I'm getting the signal I'm running out of time.
So I will. I think I'll stop there. I did have a few case studies which I won't go through. I'll just